Good morning, Yix. I hope you're well and I've had a good day so far. Today we're going to work within our English session on looking at the skills of using relative clauses effectively within our writing. And then we're also going to try and use those within our writing to write a diary entry relating to one of the characters from Just So, the Just So story, sorry. So as we go through that successfully, we'll understand what a relative pronoun is. We will make sure we're clear about what a main clause is in a sentence. We'll clarify, so we'll check we understand how to use relative clauses, and we'll recall one of the Just So stories, and then we'll pretend to be one of those characters within the story and write the diary entry as though we're one of those characters. Okay, guys, I'm just going to get my face away from there. A bit of recall, then a bit of catching up on what we already know. So here are 7 words on the right-hand side in black, and some of them are relative pronouns which are used to refer to the different groupings there. So one grouping is people and sometimes pet animals. Another grouping is animals and things, animals and nouns. Another grouping is people, animals, and things informal. Another one is possessive. Okay, so possessive, where it's normally formal, and another one is people in a more formal setting. Okay, so let's see if you can identify which one goes with which. So first one, who is normally for people or animals that are pets. We say pets because normally to give an animal to treat it like a human, so to anamorphize it, we'd normally have it as a pet rather than just a cow. So if you remember within the private peaceful writing we've done so far, the relative pronoun for the horse that the colonel was writing on was that sometimes rather than who. Okay, we didn't give it a characterization. So which, when we're referring to an animal which we don't have a perception of it as a character, we might refer to it as which, like that. The reason I put which there and the other which is also on the right-hand side of the screen is just to make the point that when we're referring as a relative pronoun, we're spelling which with the H as the second letter. That then is slightly more informal for when we're talking about people and things and animals as well. Whose, okay, so it's more, it's the possessive, so whose is normally referring to when something belongs to somebody else, and whom is a preposition. We don't normally see that in writing, but that's more formal sides of writing. So those are our 5 relative pronouns. Okay. Vocabulary then, if we look here at the diary entry here that we've got, this is an example of a diary entry from a Diary of a Wimpy Kid. What I'm just going to do is move my face away. There we go. And then I'm just going to read through this diary entry and we'll see if we've got any interesting vocabulary within it that we'd like to mirror in our own writing. Okay, so sorry, it says Just So at the top. It should say the Diary of a Wimpy Kid. I'm sorry about that. It's a slight typo. Friday, after everyone was in bed, I snuck downstairs to listen to Roderick's CD on the stereo in the family room. I put Roderick's new headphones on and cranked up the volume really high. Then I hit play. Before I got interrupted, I only got to hear about 30 seconds of the first song. It turns out I didn't have the headphones plugged in to the speakers, into the stereo. So the music was actually coming out of the speakers. In 10 seconds flat, so I like that fronted adverbial for time. So in 10 seconds, really quickly, Dad marched me up to my room and shut the door behind me. Then he said, "Let's you and me have a talk, friend." Whenever Dad says friend that way, you know you're in trouble. Tonight, Dad yelled at me for about 10 minutes, and then I guess he decided he'd rather be in bed than standing in my room in his underwear. Usually, the good thing about Dad is that when he gets mad, he cools off real quick, and then it's over. Mum has a totally different style. The first thing she does is to take a few days to figure out what your punishment will be. While you're waiting, you do all of these nice things to try to get off easier. After a few days, right when you forget you're in trouble, then she lays it on you. So we've got these elements of a diary entry, and we can see some verbs there that are quite interesting. So interrupted rather than broken, yelling rather than said or shouted. Okay, so it's quite precise, the language that's used here. We've got those verbs within it. We also see some nouns like punishment. Okay, and we can see therefore how that can be used. How those nouns can be used to describe what happened to somebody. The general features of the diary entry we'll talk about in a little bit. But the key point I'm trying to make here is that even when we're writing informally, as diary entries tend to be, we can still show that rich vocabulary. So we can use a variety of verbs that are carefully chosen. We can use a variety of nouns that are carefully chosen. Having a look here, we'll try and think about synonyms for these vocabulary points. So punishment, we could have penalty. I'm trying to think of another one. I know penalty is something that happens in football, so that's my context for understanding it. And therefore, I know it's the punishment for somebody fouling somebody. But it's also used if you, for example, if you broke the rules on COVID as an adult, you could get a fixed penalty fine. Okay, that's like a punishment, so you get charged some money. Okay, now I was thinking, do I mean forfeit or do I mean treat? Well, it's something that goes against you when you've done something wrong. So what do I mean? Treat something good, isn't it? So I don't want to say treat. I want to think about it as a forfeit. So I'm thinking about forfeit rather than treat. Okay, and here by looking at the context where punishment was, that can show me what I wanted to appear. I wanted to get rid of treat there. Interrupted then, that other, I want you to try and think, if you can, in your writing about synonyms for punishment and synonyms for interrupted. So I'd like you to think about some, based on the context where the words appear in that diary entry, of some synonyms for that, those verbs and those nouns. So the noun of punishment, we've got penalty and forfeit. Can you think of 4 more synonyms for that? And then we've got the verb of interrupted. So when we interrupt somebody, what are we doing? Can you think of 6 synonyms for interrupted? Okay, just to try and build that rich vocabulary up. Relative clauses then are something that are really useful in our writing. They allow us to add extra information. We've already looked quickly at those relative pronouns, and I'd like you to quickly pause this and see if you can spot which relative pronoun should go in each of these spaces. So pause it for 10 seconds. That's the man who. This is the place where. This is the girl whose. Chris was late, which. And the race that I won was the 100-meter sprint. So we've got those relative pronouns completing those sentences. Now I've got a sentence here. Can you spot where the relative clause is? Now, sometimes relative clauses are in the middle of a sentence if they're an embedded relative clause, but they still need to start with relative pronoun. Now, reading this sentence, the old house that had stood on the hill for over a century was covered in ivy and moss. Reading that sentence through, I can see that is the relative pronoun. Therefore, I know that that's where the relative clause begins. So the relative clause there is that had stood on the hill for over a century. So the old house was covered in ivy and moss. The black element of the sentence is the main clause. It makes sense on its own. That had stood on the hill for over a century isn't a sentence. It doesn't make sense on its own. Therefore, it's not a main clause, so it doesn't make sense on its own. Therefore, that needs to be the subordinate clause. And in this instance, because it's got the relative pronoun at the beginning of that, it becomes a relative clause. It's an embedded one because it's in the middle of the elements of the main clause. We've got 2 parts of a sentence here, and we're going to match the 2 sentence fragments together to create 2 sentences with a relative pronoun from a word bank. The word bank gives us who and where. So if I've got the footballer, now footballers normally are people. Okay, obviously we might have seen robotic footballers, or we might have pretend footballers, or we might see animal footballers, but always therefore we'd have it as a being. So the footballer, then I'm thinking who. So I'm thinking who, and then who, and I'm thinking who was called Sam. Okay, and that leaves me with the Antarctic Ocean, which is location. So then I need the relative pronoun of where, like where penguins live is cold all year. Both of these, again, have become embedded relative clauses. So who was called Sam and where penguins live, both of them have been put in the midst of a main clause. Okay, we could have said the footballer scored we could have said it in slightly different ways, but by putting it in the middle, it becomes an embedded relative clause. Okay, an embedded relative clause. Now, the sentence below, does it make sense? I'm going to read it and have a think. The golden ticket, when you receive it, needs to be opened in front of me. Now, would that sentence still make sense if we remove the underlined section? Let's see. The golden ticket, when you receive it, full stop. Does that make sense? The golden ticket, when you receive it. No, it doesn't make sense, doesn't it? Why doesn't it make sense? What's it missing? The golden ticket, when you receive it. Yeah. At the moment, I haven't said what needs to happen to that subject. The subject is the golden ticket. I haven't said what needs to happen to it. I haven't got an action for the subject. And I need that subject to have an action for it to be a sentence. It needs to be the subject is the golden ticket, but unless I give that subject an action, it's not a sentence. Okay. So I need that main clause to have the action for it to make sense. Right, guys, here we've got Camel's diary. You're going to be doing something similar to this today, where you write your own diary entry based on one of those 3 just so stories you've read. So this bit of diary here. What a difficult day. So it starts with this exclamation. This morning I was standing quietly in the desert, watching sand swirling at the breeze in the breeze. I was minding my own business when horse came up to me. Some of the other animals have been messing around with man. And because of these stories giving characters such as animals names without the determinant of the, man is also given a name of man rather than Mr. Spring or Mrs. Spring or whatever. Messing around with man, making such a fuss. Horse who. So I could put a relative clause in there, couldn't I? I've got horse who, but then those ellipses is demonstrating the missing element of the text. What could I put there? Asked if I wanted to help him. What could I show as a opening there to the sentence? What am I doing at the same? As I explained, so I'm doing something at the same time as explaining. As I danced, as I slept, I explained that I could not help today. Now remembering, Cam was quite lazy, so it's probably as I slept or as I yawned. I explained that I could not help today. Horse spluttered, crossed and stormed off. I love that verb of storming off. Typical horse behaviour. That exclamation sentence. Typical horse behaviour. Still quite. It's informal because it's a diary entry, so still quite a short sentence. Typical horse behaviour. It was not very long before dog appeared. Dog who, and again, what could I say about dog? Dog who something always also wanted me to show him. Dog who always moaned at me to do things. Since I was too tired, I refused. So there's these little elements of this diary entry where I could add some more information in. So, as I'm looking through this, I can think about what I could add in. I also spot then I've got this exclamation at the beginning. I've got the different animal characters, horse, man. I've got different verbs such as spluttered, and I've got then those relative clauses. And then I'm starting to think about what I know I can include in the diary entry. So I know I can include an exclamation, I can include the different characters, I can include those yellow relative clauses, and I can include some rich vocabulary. Now, at the moment, I haven't completed this diary entry. And if you're being a little bit fancy the easy option, you could complete the camel's diary entry. But I'd really like you to have a go at writing one of these for one of the other animals. Okay, so I'd like you to think about whichever one it was that you did your summary of earlier in the week. So it might be the whale one, it might be the camel one, but thinking about the dog or another character within the camel one, or it might be the rhino story. And whichever of those stories you summarized, I'd like you to think about writing a diary entry based on that no-show for that character. So maybe the rhino, maybe the whale, maybe the mariner within the whale and the mariner story. Maybe the jinn, the character who creates through magic the changes in one of the other characters. So think about which character you're going to use. And then we've got the idea that we've got today was a nightmare. So I've got that exclamation. If the mariner, who was impeccably dressed, or think about who I'm writing about here, if the mariner, who was impeccably dressed, so I've got that relative clause, hadn't tricked me, it would have been much better. Okay, so I'm being quite complimentary about his clothing because maybe at the moment I don't realise those suspenders are going to be the downfall of me. So who do you think I'm writing for? If the mariner. So I've said about the character of the mariner, and I've said that he's impeccably dressed. Yeah, I'm the whale, aren't I? Who was impeccably dressed, had tricked me, it would have been much better. Okay. I didn't like tricked. I didn't like it. Let's use a bit of rich vocabulary. Hadn't hoodwinked me, so let's use that rich vocabulary there. Hadn't hoodwinked me, it would have been much better. And so you're going to write then your diary entry for one of those characters, ideally an animal, so maybe the whale, maybe the rhino, and I look forward to reading those really soon to find out what you think would happen to one of them in the story. So you're just trying to really absorb some of the elements of one of those just so stories and write a diary entry for me. Okay, look forward to seeing those. Thank you very much for your time and your attention today, Year 6. See you soon.